What if you could speak in a way that shifted your audience's beliefs, disrupted their way of thinking, and inspired them to take action toward a better way? How would you feel about having that kind of an impact as a speaker? Well, in today's video, we're continuing on in our Speak Like Jesus series and diving into Matthew chapter 5 and the latter part of the chapter, verses 17 to 48, to look at how Jesus spoke and how he had such an impact on his listeners. If we've never met before, my name is Lisa Vanderkwaak, or Lisa V for short. I am a world class certified speaking coach, and I have been in this industry for almost 17 years on the online space and in person. And I am fascinated when I look at how Jesus masterfully spoke in the scriptures. Now, you're going to learn a lot today. Today is going to be packed with tools and skills that you can begin to learn to be able to have a much greater impact on your listeners. So, are you ready? So, in this chapter, let's just take a look right now. We're going to read a bit of this chapter just to kind of give you context. And then I'm going to unpack it a bit and highlight some amazing techniques that you as a speaker can implement if you want to speak like Jesus and have the kind of impact that he had. Okay, let me just pull this up a little bit full screen for you if I can. I'm going to see if I can make this a little bit better. Oh, maybe not. Hang on, hang on. Give me a. All right, we'll just make it a little bit better. There we go. How's that? Is that better? A little bit more readable? I'll get rid of that little frame there that I have. Get rid of this. How do I get rid of this? Okay. How do I get rid of this reader? There we go. Okay. Bear with me. All right, so let's dive in here in Matthew chapter 4. Now, if you've been following along, we just did a training on the first part of this chapter. And now Jesus moves into some familiar passages that you may recognize as we go through this. But he talks about, for example, the fulfillment of the law, that he didn't come to set aside the law of Moses or the writings, but he came to perfect it. Okay, bear with me now. We're not going to go through this theologically, but I'm just going to give you a run through so you understand the context. And he's talking about, if you violate one of the commandments, you violate them all, and so on. Then he gets into the whole aspect of anger. You're familiar with the commandment taught by your ancestors, do not murder or you'll be judged. But I'm telling you, if you hold anger in your heart toward a fellow believer, you are subject to judgment. So he takes it from the outside action to the inside, okay? And then he goes on to talk about the whole area of reconciliation. Don't go and worship if you know that someone has something against you. You need to go and try and reconcile with your brother. Then he talks about adultery, looking at it from what is adultery, and then talks about making oaths and going on here for the last part, loving your enemies. Okay. So he's looking at different aspects of the law that his listeners, that his audience would have been familiar with. Now you can go ahead and read it for yourself, but basically he is looking at the law and breaking out some of the core ones that they would be familiar with and be very proud that they maybe hadn't broken. And so he's going to come and he's going to speak to them in a way that shifts their belief system, that shifts the way they think, and disrupts actually the way that they approach reconciliation and reconciliation with God, loving God, worshiping God, but also reconciliation with their fellow man. All right, so we see in this passage, chapter 5, and why I said you can sharpen your speaking skills using chapter 5, because here Jesus masterfully uses what I call you focused language. This is not a terminology that I coined, it's something that I was taught when I was being coached as a speaker, but also in my training as a world-class certified speaking coach. Yes, there are trainees, there are certifications. I'm also ICF certified as a coach. So I do have a few credentials, but also I have years of experience. But here we see in chapter 5, Jesus masterfully uses you focused language. He uses contrast, he uses curiosity and persuasive language to engage his audience, to challenge their beliefs, and to lead them toward a deeper reflection and action. And this is really key. You cannot have connection without reflection. And Jesus is masterful at helping and allowing or provoking his listeners to reflect on their own life and how what he's saying might apply to their life. And as you as a speaker, this is a absolutely powerful skill that you want to learn and be willing to engage in to be able to master it. Because if you want to learn how to use these same techniques to connect with your audience and inspire change and really help people to have a better life, then I want you to first of all check out my free speaker toolkit at speakergift.com, and you'll find all kinds of tools there, all kinds of tips that you could implement right away. All right, let's dive in. Matthew chapter 5 verses 17 to 48. So in this passage, as I mentioned, Jesus repeatedly uses what's called you-focused language to connect with his listeners on a personal level. Now, this you is you, the audience, not you, the speaker. So, for example, he says, if you think, and then he goes on to say, if another place he says, whoever obeys or whoever violates. But when he's addressing his audience, he's not addressing them as a mass group, because keep in mind, Jesus at many times was speaking to massive crowds, but he was addressing his audience directly, and he brings the message to their level, making it personal and relevant when he uses what's called you-focused language. And so although he was speaking to massive crowds, he always used this technique. In other words, he spoke to one, not to all. My mentor, Craig Valentine, taught me, especially when you're in person, he's saying, and you might want to write this down. This is a great tip. Look to all, but speak to one. Is when you are, if you want to really connect with your audience, you want to use your language in such a way that it speaks to one, but you're looking with your eyes and you are engaging with your body in that regard to all. You are encompassing, you're allowing them all to be included. But there's really something powerful when you use what's called you-focused language, because it's a singular you. It's not mass, it's not a group think you. And here's why this is so effective. When you use you-focused language, each person in the audience feels like you are speaking directly to them. Have you ever heard a speaker and walked away feeling like, wow, that person was just speaking directly to me through that whole thing? That's probably because this speaker was a skilled speaker and knew this secret and this technique that is absolutely more powerful to interact and to engage and to have a lasting impact on your listeners. Because when you are speaking in this way as a speaker, it moves your audience from passive listening to active reflection. And as I mentioned earlier, you cannot have connection without reflection. So as a speaker, start using language that directly engages your audience if you want to have a greater impact. You can say, for example, instead of saying something like, some people struggle with visibility, say it like this. If you've been hiding your gifts, it's time to step out of the shadows. So what did I do? I said, some of you or some people may struggle with visibility. Now, there's nothing wrong with some people, but often if we do that a lot, then you are actually not making a personal connection. This is very common. You'll hear speakers say this very commonly. Some of you, or how many of you, and that again appeals to a group think and a group response. So you want to put it into, have you ever? If you've been hiding your gifts, it's time to step out of the shadows. If you are struggling with visibility, try this. So this shift in language creates connection, and it actually draws your listeners in. So if you've ever struggled with that, having more of an engaging interaction with your listener, then you're going to want to learn this technique called you-focused language. So I want to add here that although we are looking mostly at the words that Jesus spoke, keep in mind that how he said them is even more impactful. What do I mean by that? Well, sometimes you can get a glimpse of the tone that he used in his voice or the body language if the writer describes it. However, from the context, you can also gather how he postured himself, how he spoke, using his inflection, his voice, or his emotion, or his body. And and you can see how these played a vital role in communicating with his listeners and helping them to shift into a different mode of living, a different mode of acting. Did you know that the words that you say only have 7% influence over your listener's perception of you? This is really important for you to understand because most speakers, and you might be like most speakers and spend 99.9% of the time when you are preparing for a message or delivering a message and spending trying to get the exact words out, to trying to get the right words, when in fact words only have a 7% influence over your listener's perception of you. When I was in training as a speech language pathologist many years ago, I was doing my graduate degree. And at that time, I heard about a study done, and it has been repeated over the years, but it was a study to find out what are the factors that have the greatest influence on your listener's perception of you. So, as a speaker, what are the factors that help your listeners see you as believable, trustworthy, and likable? What are the factors, and are there things within our control as a speaker, within your control as a speaker, that you can understand and actually prepare for so that right out the gate, you can set yourself up for success, be seen as confident and credible? So in these studies, and this is really important because people do business with people they know, like, and trust. And if they don't see you as trustworthy, if your audience or listeners don't see you as believable or even likable, they're not going to listen, and they're definitely not going to do business with you. So it's really important that you understand what is it that you can actually take some time to invest in training yourself so that you can stand with greater confidence, speak in such a way that people perceive you and see you and respond to you as someone who is believable, who is credible, who is likable. Now, there was a study done, as I mentioned, and there were 3 areas. Let me just pull this up on the screen here for you to see. There were 3 areas that they did in the study to look at: the words, the non-words or the sounds, and the physical intelligence. In other words, there were the words you say, the sounds that come out of your mouth, and not just your body language, but your physical presence. That includes your posture, how you groom yourself, whether or not you come across as someone who takes care of themselves. And here are the results. This may shock you, but 7% of the words, 7% of the influence comes from your words. And 38% come from the sounds that come out of your mouth. So these are both the good sounds and the bad sounds. You know those fillers? You know those fillers? You know what I'm talking about? Those actually have a negative impact on your listener's perception of you. So it's really important that you learn how to minimize that. And this is one of the things that I help my clients do, is to eliminate fillers so that it doesn't trip your audience up, or it helps you to be more credible and sound more engaging, but also more professional in your presentation. So the words have 7%, the non-words or the sounds that come out of your mouth, both the fillers, and this also encompasses your vocal variety, the melody, pitch, tone, pace, and volume, how you use those elements of voice to express the words have a 38% influence. Let that sink in, much more than the words themselves. So just like a singer needs to train their voice, you as a speaker also, it's important that you understand that training your voice and learning how to use your authentic voice, but also the proper way of expressing emotion with your voice is so crucial. And I love this part because most speakers actually don't even know about this. They neglect it They've never been taught in their training. And oh, excuse me. And then finally, the last component is the physical intelligence, which of course is 55%, the visual, very powerful. So this also includes, for example, moving on stage. When you are moving from one place to the other, or even on a platform like this, how you use your body is really important. Now, let me just say this. Even as a podcaster, without any video, your physical intelligence, how you use your body, will also affect your vocal quality. So it's important for you to understand what are the factors, even within that physical intelligence, that can help you. I like to say it like this: tilt the odds in your favor of being seen as confident, credible, and believable. When you learn these things, you set yourself up for success right out the gate. Now, you can't control what other people think of you. However, you can certainly be prepared and do all that you can to ensure that you present yourself in a way that helps them to see you as confident and credible and believable. All right, so that is the first thing that we see, is the whole area of you focused language. Really important technique in order to connect with your audience in a personal, more meaningful way. The second thing you'll see in this section of scripture is how Jesus uses contrast to disrupt his audience members' beliefs. Have you ever done that? Have you ever used contrast to help people to rethink maybe what it is that they actually believe, and to help them to examine maybe things that they have learned in the past, and to see whether or not it's still true for today? This is one of Jesus' most powerful techniques in this passage. And he's used he I've looked at contrast before in previous videos, and Jesus uses this technique a lot in the scriptures. You'll see this used a lot because it's very powerful. So in this particular section, he contrasts what his audience has been taught, for example, in the scriptures or from the ancient writings, with the deeper truths that he is now revealing. For example, he'll say something like, "You've heard it said, but I say to you." So he's contrast. You've heard it said, do not, do not sleep with your neighbor's wife. But I say to you, even when you look with lust, you are still committing adultery. So he's taking a contrast of what they have already known and heard to something that is a deeper truth and revelation. He says things like, your ancestors taught you, or your ancestors were taught. However, I tell you. So why does this type of contrast work? Well, using contrast can disrupt old beliefs that are keeping people stuck. It forces people to think critically and question what they've accepted as truth and why they're still hanging on to it. It actually says to the audience, you know what? It's not your fault if you're not able to overcome this problem, or if you feel stuck. No one told you there was a better way and more effective way, but I'm here to tell you. So it helps the audience to see past where they're at, and to be able to, it's like, wow, this is new information that I need to embrace. It's like saying what worked before is insufficient for you today. Maybe that's true for you. Even in the area of speaking, maybe you're following a traditional way of public speaking, and you're not quite getting the results that you hoped for or want. Well, I want to invite you to embrace a more transformational way of speaking. And some of the techniques that you're learning today will help you do just that, where you're not just giving information, but you're helping to shift beliefs and ideas and even actions to bring about a lasting transformation in the hearts and the mind of your listener. Now, let's look at in verse 21. Jesus says, you've heard it said to the people long ago. Here, let me just bring it up here. You shall not murder. People long ago, you shall not murder. But I tell you that anyone, or hold anger in your heart, But anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. So here's an example of what I'm talking about, where he's bringing a contrast. He takes a familiar teaching and reveals a deeper layer of truth to create a deeper understanding, but exposing also the heart condition behind the action. So he's going to the motives, he's going to the deep places of the heart. So not only does the contrast disrupt old beliefs, but it also challenges one's motivations. As a speaker, you can also use contrast to challenge your audience's assumptions. For instance, you can say, you might think that speaking on a stage is only for extroverts, but I'm here to tell you that even the most introverted person can captivate an audience with the right tools. And in fact, in my experience, introverts who invest in developing their speaking skills are often the best speakers. So what did I do? I contrasted maybe a belief that you had to be an extrovert in order to become the best kind of a speaker. But in fact, studies show and experience shows that no, it's actually the introverts that can become the better speakers if they embrace a growth mindset and learn the speaking skills. Extroverts you don't even have to be an extrovert to be a great speaker. In fact, if you surveyed some of the best speakers in the world, you'd find that the majority of them self-identify as an introvert. I know I do. So when you present a contrast in your speaking, in your message, it creates curiosity. It compels your audience to listen more closely, to think a little bit more critically, and to reflect on their own life. It's kind of an examining something that maybe they believe that they're going to have to weigh out now and decide if they're going to let go of that belief and embrace the new belief. So that's the power of contrast. Another thing that contrast does is it taps into it, and Jesus did this masterfully, where he taps into two core motivations of his audience: what they want to avoid and what they want to attain. In verse 19 of chapter 5, he says, whoever violates one of the least of these commands will be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever obeys them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. See what he did here? Jesus highlights one, the pain of being least esteemed in the kingdom of heaven. People who are motivated by avoiding pain, it's like if you want to be least esteemed in the kingdom of heaven, you don't want to be least esteemed, then you want to avoid this. If you want to be greatly esteemed, so there's the desire part, being greatly esteemed in the kingdom of heaven. If you're motivated by pleasure, then this kind of a statement is going to motivate you. So he contrasts those two things, and he speaks to the motivation of the heart. It helps motivate his audience to take action because it connects both to their fear of a negative outcome or their hope of a positive one, depending on what they're motivated by. And depending on what you're motivated by, when you, as an audience member, hear his words, you will reflect on what you want. You want to avoid something or you want to attain something, and you'll act accordingly. This is a brilliant and absolutely essential. It's such an important skill for a communicator to speak to the different ways that your audience members process and respond to information, because this is really what's going to motivate people to action. As a speaker, you want to ask yourself, what does my audience want to avoid? And what does my audience want to achieve or attain? Then include in your messaging sentences in the structure that's both, or examples that speak to both. For example, you can say, if you stay silent about your message, you may never create the impact that you're called to make, and you might find yourself dying on the inside. However, when you step up and speak with boldness, you're going to transform lives and step into your God-given purpose and discover a newfound freedom that you never knew was possible. So did you hear that? I addressed both the pain and desire. I tapped into motivations of my audience members to help move them forward toward the transformation that I'm offering, but also what they want. Very powerful skill to learn. All right, let's continue on here. Jesus didn't just disrupt beliefs, but he also gave practical steps. In this short passage, we see this as well. He gave practical steps to his audience so that they can live out the deeper truths that he taught. For example, in verses 23 to 24, he says, if you are offering your gift at the altar and remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift right there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift. He's showing them exactly how to apply the principles of reconciliation in their everyday life. He's bringing it home, so to speak. And as a speaker, you also want to do that. This has a extremely powerful impact on your listeners. You don't want to just inspire your audience in the moment. You want to empower them with actionable steps. Give them something that they can take away and use right away. This is really powerful. And every time you speak, you want to be able to do that. Something that they can do in the moment or write down and do right after they hear you speak is very powerful to impact your audience in a lasting way. For example, instead of saying you need to be more visible, you can say, this week, create one social media post that highlights your expertise, your area of passion, and share how you can help others. So I gave you a tangible, right? I didn't just say you got to become more visible. So this week, go out and create a social media post and how to do that. When you, as a speaker, give your audience practical steps, you make transformational attainable, even actionable. And this is so powerful. All right, coming into the home stretch here. One of the other things that Jesus did is he used powerful questions that provoked reflection and deepened understanding for his listeners. For example, in verse 46, he asks, if you love only those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? Whoa. There's a double entendre here in this particular question, because not only was he asking a provocative question that allowed them to think and reflect, but he was also doing a contrast. He was also setting them up of what they wanted to avoid. Well, they didn't want to be known. They didn't want to be despised or looked upon as the tax collectors were, but he compared them and he contrasted them to the tax collector. More of a comparison, probably. So questions like these will challenge your listeners to examine their motives and actions. It will disrupt complacency and invite them to have self-reflection, which is really a powerful tool of engaging them in a deeper, more meaningful way. As a speaker, if you're not already doing it, I want to encourage you to use powerful questions, because powerful questions help your listener to really go deeper and think through what is they believe, what are the actions they need to take, but also to move them in a direction that maybe they wouldn't otherwise move in, because they are not really knowing how to do that, right? It inspires action in your listener when you ask them a powerful question. And Jesus was a master at this. Now, let me just point out a few more things that Jesus did, a few more techniques, I should say, that Jesus did that were powerful and effective and that you can use to sharpen your speaking skills. In addition to the questions, let me just say this as well. When you use powerful questions, you evoke your audience to think critically and to really maybe be honest with themselves. For example, you could say, what's really holding you back from stepping into your calling as a speaker? Is it fear of rejection? Or do you simply not know what to say? Sometimes it helps them to clarify. Oh yeah, I never thought about that. What is it? Because questions then open the door for this internal transformation. Because the question forces your audience to wrestle with their own thoughts and beliefs. And when they do that, when you as a listener or you as a speaker help your listener wrestle with their own thoughts and beliefs, you're helping create a mini transformation. That's what I call it, a mini transformation right there on the spot while they are listening to you. So the power of questions. Here's another thing that Jesus does is throughout this passage, Jesus positions himself as an authority by contrasting his teaching with what the audience had previously learned. So he's very in tune with what his audience knows and doesn't know. So he says things like, "You've heard it said before, but I tell you." Now, he's not dismissing the old teaching entirely. He's just building on them and inviting them to come to a deeper truth. What does this do? Well, this positions him as a credible voice, as a voice worth listening to. But it also helps his listeners to see that it's not their fault, as I mentioned earlier, because they weren't really given the whole truth. What they did, what they knew for that time maybe was okay, but now is a new time and they need to go to the next level. So as a speaker, you can establish your authority by sharing insights that, go beyond that surface level understanding, helping them to see that, what worked back then may not work today. So let me fill you in on some movements or pivots you might need to make, or some new understandings that you need to adopt in order to move forward in this new era. Jesus, for example, I could say, "You may have heard that great speakers are born, not made. But let me tell you the truth. Great speakers are built through applying the right strategies, intentional practice, and mastering the right skills," right? So I'm contrasting here. I'm tapping into something that you have heard before, maybe a saying or a quote or something that someone with authority said. But I'm saying now I'm bringing it one step further and saying, well, actually, there's more to it than that. And when you as a speaker position yourself as authority, your audience is more likely to trust you and follow your guidance. You see, speaking is not just about talking, giving information. It's also about building know, like, and trust with every audience that you encounter. All right, the final thing I want to bring out here is how Jesus, he doesn't stop with just disrupting their belief system, but he painted a picture of what's possible if his audience were to follow his teachings. Now, this is a really, really important if you are in any way wanting to help your listeners see why it's important for them to adopt what you are saying and to believe what you're saying so that they can see the result that they can get. And Jesus does this beautifully. He paints a picture of what's possible when his audience follows his teaching. For example, he says in verse 48, he says, "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect," meaning you can be like your heavenly Father if you choose to do this. This is a call to action. He's inviting his audience to step into a higher standard of living and to go after this preferred future. Now, as a speaker, you want to inspire your audience with a vision of what's possible. For example, you could say something like, or I could say something like, "Imagine what your life would look like if you stepped into your calling and became the high impact speaker, affecting change, glorifying God, and walking boldly in your purpose. How will that make you feel? How will that change your business? How will that change the outcome?" You want to give when you speak in such a way that you paint a preferred future or give them a window into what's possible. You also give your audience a glimpse of the transformation that's waiting for them, and that will inspire them to take the next step. So, what about you? Are you beginning to see what's possible for you if you decide to go all in on becoming the very best speaker you can be? Well, hopefully what you've learned in this video and the others, that you see some powerful techniques that can help you sharpen your skills. Now there's more coming. I'm not done yet. We have a lot more of passages to delve into, to bring out some nuggets of truth of how you can use the same kind of things that Jesus used when he was speaking to help you become a transformational speaker. So just as a little recap, some of the things in Matthew 5:17-48 that can help you sharpen your speaking skills by using Matthew 5 is by using the technique called you focus language, where you invite your audience to connect, to reflect on a personal level. You cannot have connection without reflection. You also can use contrast to disrupt beliefs, to challenge old ways of thinking and introduce them to different ways of thinking or deeper truths. You can tap into their pain or their desire to motivate action by addressing what your audience wants to avoid or what they want to achieve. You can provide practical steps to empower your audience to take action, like Jesus did. And you can ask provocative, reflective questions to really invite your audience to think deeper, and to really self-reflect. You can also position yourself as a credible authority by building on familiar ideas that they already know and new insights and adding to them. And finally, you can inspire action by painting a picture of what is possible for them and inviting them to step into that next step. So if you're ready to sharpen your speaking skills and become a transformational communicator like Jesus, I invite you to check out one of my best and free resources at speakergift.com. Remember, just like Jesus, you're called to disrupt beliefs, inspire action, and lead others to transformation. Your voice matters. The world needs what you have to offer. You alone can bring it. So I want to exhort you today, step up, speak boldly, and shine brightly. The world is waiting for you to be seen and heard. So I want to exhort you today to step up, speak boldly, and shine brightly. The world is waiting for you to speak. The world is waiting for you to be seen and heard. As you're listening today, you may have felt prompted to say, I want to become a much better speaker. I want to be able to speak with confidence, clarity, and transformational impact. I want to invite you to check out the link in the comments below, wherever you're listening to this. Your voice is an instrument of transformation and needs to be heard, so let it be heard.